Welcome to Revenue Scotland's YouTube channel. This video provides an overview of the 3-year review of leases for land and buildings transaction tax. Land and buildings transaction tax replaced stamp duty land tax in Scotland on the 1st of April 2015, and it may apply to anyone leasing non-residential land or property in Scotland. Where a notifiable lease has been granted on or after the 1st of April 2015, an LBTT return must be submitted by the tenant. Leases are treated quite differently to standard purchases of land and buildings for tax purposes. In most cases, when a purchase is completed, any LBTT is paid and the title is registered, and there is no likelihood of change to the tax position. Leases, however, often continue over a period of years and can be subject to change throughout. For example, variations, extensions, assignations, rent reviews, and tacit relocation, and the tax position must be reviewed to give effect to these changes. The Land and Buildings Transaction Tax Scotland Act 2013 applies differently to how stamp duty land tax applies in the rest of the UK, as it requires the tenant in a lease that has been subject to an LBTT return to submit a further return to Revenue Scotland every 3 years. Ordinarily, this will be on every third anniversary of the effective date of the lease, i.e. years 3, 6, 9, etc. These further returns will inform Revenue Scotland of any changes that have occurred since the last LBTT return was submitted, and to review the amount of tax chargeable on the lease taking account of those changes. The tenant must recalculate the tax using the rates and bands in force at the effective date of the lease. If the tenant calculates that more tax is due, they must make payment of the additional tax at the same time as the return is made. If it is calculated that less tax is payable, a claim for repayment of tax should be submitted in the LBTT return. A further return must still be submitted even if there have been no changes to the lease or if no additional tax is payable. Another event where a review return is required is upon assignation of a lease. An assignation of a lease is the transfer by the tenant, the assignee, of their interest under the lease to another party. Where a lease is assigned, the outgoing tenant, the assignor, must complete a further return. After the effective date of the assignation, the assignee assumes the assignor's duties in relation to LBTT. Anything that was done by the assignor in relation to the lease is to be treated as if it was done by the assignee. The final situation where a review return is required is upon termination of a lease. A further return must be submitted by the outgoing tenant, whether the lease terminates before the end of the agreed term or on the natural expiry of the lease. The requirement for tenants to submit further returns only applies to leases which have been subject to an LBTT return. This means that leases agreed under stamp duty land tax or stamp duty, which have not been varied or extended since the 1st of April 2015, are not brought into charge for LBTT, and therefore the tenants in such leases are not required to submit further returns. Similarly, where an LBTT return has been submitted for a lease and that return includes a claim to a 100% relief, for example group relief, the tenant will not be obliged to complete a 3-year review return, as long as that relief continues to apply to the transaction. The tenant has 30 days from the date after the review date to file their LBTT return. If the review date for a lease is the 1st of April 2018, the further return must be submitted by the 1st of May 2018. Payment of tax must be made at the same time as the return is filed. Payment can be made to Revenue Scotland by BACS, CHAPS. If the return and payment are not made, or are not made on time, then penalties and interest will apply. That concludes this overview of 3-year review of leases for land and buildings transaction tax. please contact Revenue Scotland for any further information.